Let's get started. Kia ora koutou, lovely to see you all today. My name's Sylvie. I'll be our webinar host today for our People Management 101 session this afternoon. I'm MyHR's Chief Evangelist. What that means is I'm an HR person and I pop up often in our marketing and sales conversations, and I'll be taking us through our session today. So I will just very quickly share my screen and we will kick into things. It would be amazing if I could get a couple of hands up just so I know that you can see and hear me okay. If there are any technical issues, I can do my best to resolve them on the fly, but I'm getting a few hands raised. Okay, cool. Sounds like everything is working. Let me share my screen and we will kick off with today's session. Alrighty, so People Management 101, the do's, don'ts and key risks of managing staff. So when we were thinking about a topic for this webinar, we really wanted to understand what was causing our small business clients the most pain. We're obviously in touch with our businesses every day, and what's been coming up a lot is this idea of trying to equip our existing teams to get more out of them and more out of their teams and to make life a bit easier for everyone. So this people management topic is one that's very close to my heart. I have been a people manager. I don't lead a team at the moment, but this is 100% the resource I wish I had when I was 27 and was stepping up to lead my first team of 5 at the time. So we've written it with people managers in mind. We've also tried to make it useful for business owners. Once you get to a certain size in your business, you typically are managing managers, right? You're no longer on the tools yourself. You're not exactly in touch with every single person in your business. You're having to trust this kind of intermediate layer of people to support your team and to get the work done. So along the way, we'll be talking about how as a business manager or a leader of managers, you can be understanding what good management looks like, you can be supporting your team, and you can be making sure that everyone has what they need to get the job done. So without further ado, let's kick into our housekeeping. So before we get started, just a couple of things to note. Questions are very welcome. So this is a reasonably informal session. I can talk for a long time about any of these topics, but it really comes alive when there's a bit of engagement from you on the call. If you have questions, if you'd like to challenge anything I'm saying, we can have a respectful conversation for sure. So pop your question in the Q&A piece. If you'd like it to be anonymous, you've got a button there. And then towards the end of the session today, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I tend not to answer them as I go along, just because sometimes I cover off the question later on. But if there's something you'd like me to speak to, please feel free to jump in and yeah, we can take it from there. The slides and the recording will be available afterwards. So if you have to duck off and take a call, if you can't stay for the entirety of the recording, I know we have one person who's joining us from the UK today. They're very dedicated, clearly, but if they didn't make it through to the end of the session, I would completely understand. You will have access to this as a resource later. Also means, of course, if you do ask a question, it will be captured in the recording. If you'd like to make it anonymous, you're welcome to do so. If there are any identifying details in your question, I might scrub them just to make sure it's stuff that in your shoes I would be happy kind of having on a webinar recording. So don't feel shy, but just to be aware that this will be captured and available later on. There will be some bonus resources too. So I've mentioned the recording and the slides. You'll have a link to book in some time with me if you'd like to, and also a leadership self-assessment tool if you are a leader or you're managing leaders to understand where your skills gaps might be in the 6 core leadership skills that we'll be talking about today. So more on that later. And in the follow-up email, you'll also get a quick survey just asking how we did. We want to make sure that we're producing useful content and respecting your time and making sure this is useful to our audience. So we'd love to hear if this was a useful session, if there was something that you wish we'd done differently, and particularly what you might be keen on us doing in the future, right? We want to make sure that this is useful time and a useful way to kind of advocate for our industry. So yeah, give us your feedback and let us know if there's anything you'd like to see us do differently or do better. This is the marketing and sales slide to make sure I'm keeping everyone happy. So who's MyHR and why am I talking to you today about people management? So we're a better way to do HR, and we were founded in 2013 by Sean and Jason, our co-founders, who are a small businessman and an HR expert. They wanted to make useful, pragmatic HR and employment law advice available to small businesses without having to employ someone in-house or without having to go to a lawyer who might charge you $250, $300, $350, $400 an hour. So we're based in New Zealand. Our headquarters are in Auckland. We also have offices in Christchurch and remote colleagues around the country in various locations. We also have offices in Sydney and in Vancouver, which is very exciting. I joined when I was employee number 4 and we could all fit around the table at our local lunch spot, and now with 75 colleagues in 3 different countries. It's a pretty cool place to be as a homegrown Kiwi business. So what we actually do is outsource HR covering all employment matters. This is everything from writing employment agreements for you to bullet pointing scripts for those tough conversations, through to what I think of as the pointy end of HR. So disciplinaries, trial period terminations, restructuring, all that kind of stuff. And we are built for small to medium businesses. We are not here to be the HR providers for Westpac and the warehouse and kind of larger operators. We're really built by a small and medium business owner to be a useful tool for this community, because we know that this is what we do best, and we're not kind of corporate people. I'm not in corporate dress, that's not kind of our vibe. We're really here to be a useful resource and provider for people in the small and medium business space. The way that we deliver what we do is a bit unusual. So we have a software platform that we've built in-house. We're a SaaS business, and it does what all good HR information systems do, right? So it stores your employment documents. It's where your people data lives. We connect with payroll providers so the information communicates across both platforms. We've got performance reviews, we've got onboarding, but at the behind the scenes is a team of HR people like me who are here to help you manage people issues in your business. So you can call up and have a conversation with us. We can, like I flagged earlier, be writing your disciplinary letters, we can be writing documents for you. And the embedded logic in the system means that we can deliver this at scale and feel like we're a part of your team, even though we're an outsourced provider at a fraction of the cost of an in-house HR resource. In terms of who we do business with, our smallest client has 1 employee. She's very keen. She likes to cross her T's and dot her I's. And our largest has about 750 employees. Resine Paint is our largest client. But everything in between, right? So we've got manufacturing, we've got professional services, accommodation, hospitality, retail, we've got trades and manufacturing. There's not really an industry that we don't provide support for, which means that we're very familiar with most of the issues that come up in most of these businesses. There's not a lot that we haven't seen, which means that we're really well placed to provide support when you've got a thorny people problem or a particular opportunity that you want to be taking advantage of as well. Like a SaaS business, we're a subscription-based payment model, so you pay per person per month based on how big your business is. If you shrink, your costs shrink. If you grow, your costs grow. But it means that you can get in touch with us without having to worry about getting an invoice for every 6 minutes you were on the phone. You might call us 20 times in February because you've got questions about Waitangi. You've got people starting in March. It's your busy season as we come up into summer. You've got a lot of onboarding you're getting sorted. And then in March, you might call us once or twice with a question about an employment agreement. Your costs remain the same. We don't charge you extra based on usage, it's based on headcount. So you can get in touch with us as much as you like, and we really are that fence at the top of the cliff rather than the ambulance at the bottom. That's all from me about us. Let's talk about what we're going to be covering off today. So the first thing we'll do is talk about the accidental people manager. We'll look at why businesses find this quite a tricky transition to start having people managers in their business. We'll look at why people get promoted and why that's not always it's an intuitive response, but it's not always the most tactical when you're trying to build a layer of people in your business who are managing others, and the differences between doing and managing and why this causes problems. So we'll look at some early warning signs that the people leaders in your business might need some support, and look at what it means if these people don't get the support and development that they need to be effective in their roles. And then, as you would expect, we'll spend most of our time this afternoon looking at what good looks like when it comes to people managers. So there are 6 core skills that we'll work through with some examples of what it might look like if this is a skill that you or your team have or a skill that's missing. We'll then talk about next steps, what you can do if you're a business owner and what you can do if you're a people manager to be improving your skill set here and equipping yourself to do a good job. And then obviously some time for Q&A at the end. I couldn't fit Q&A on this agenda slide because I had too many points, but there will be time for Q&A towards the end of the session today. So let's look at an accidental people manager. We'll talk about why growth is really hard to manage, why people get promoted, and that management skill gap piece. Growth is hard because maths is hard and humans are complicated. So if you think about the size of a business and as it grows, the more people you introduce, there is an inherent level of complexity that comes along with that. So if we have 2 employees, your business owner and maybe one other person, there's only one relationship to manage there, right? The relationship between the business owner and their one employee. If you have 10 people in your business, you have suddenly got 45 individual relationships at play, which are 45 opportunities for cool stuff to happen and for collaboration to happen and to make life easier. But of course, it's also 45 separate opportunities for there to be cock-ups, right? Miscommunication, tension, friction, different agendas, kind of different skill sets. You've suddenly got 45 places where things can get a bit tricky or a bit weird in your business. And if you double that to 20 employees, you now have 190 different relationships between each of these individual people where you have the potential for things to go wrong. Again, this is also where the coolest stuff about being in business comes up, right? You've got different ideas, different ways of doing things. You've got different skill sets you can learn from. All of that good stuff is happening too. But added complexity just means extra chances for things to go wrong. And it means there's just more happening for you to be across and for you to manage. Now, as businesses grow and scale, whether that's from 10 employees to 20, whether it's from 20 to 250, there are some kind of inherent or inevitable things that happen which can make it really difficult for the people who are in the business. And the first of these can be loss of access to decision making. When you've scaled as a business, particularly in a startup world or in a tech world, those early employees are pretty used to having pretty quick and immediate access to the founder or to the owners, and not having access to you in such an intimate way can be a bit challenging. You can sometimes feel a bit on the outs. You can feel like you're no longer kind of in the room where it happens as much as it is. And that dynamic can feel a bit uncomfortable when the business grows. You also just have more cliques and subgroups. This is not a criticism. Humans are very tribal creatures. Inevitably, we kind of group together in groups that we have something in common with. Sometimes it can be team-based. You might suddenly have the sales team going out for lunch and the production team's not going because it's just kind of different schedules or different teams. You might have a group of younger employees suddenly becoming friends across different teams that you didn't have before. So there's this extra dynamic of having kind of in and out groups is not quite right, but certainly different groups of people which can bring an interesting dynamic to the workplace sometimes. And as a business owner or a leader, your horizon of visibility kind of expands. You used to be able to see exactly what the 6 people in your business were working on because there were only 6 of them. It's pretty easy to keep up with what 6 people's workloads look like. But now that there are 15 people and you've got a couple of managers under you, you no longer have that interpersonal connection with each of your team because you just don't have the time to be good mates with 15 people. But you also just can't keep a track of what 15 different people are working on. So there's this visibility piece that becomes quite difficult quite quickly. And if you don't have the systems or the cadences or the rhythms in place to manage all of that work and coordinate it, suddenly you can have very different kind of levels of output, or you can have very different levels of quality of output, which can be quite challenging to manage. Inevitably, as businesses grow bigger, there's going to be a bit of conformity in terms of making sure jobs are easy to recruit for and realistically doable by one person. There'll be some more streamlining that happens, so a bit more of a focus on the process over the people, all of which can be just a bit uncomfortable if you've been a long-standing employee, kind of navigate through this change, or if you're someone who has come into the business, these growing pains can be a bit uncomfortable if you're just an employee who's showing up and just wants to do a good job. All of these factors mean that most businesses inevitably will introduce people managers. So this is someone who has employees under them who they manage. They'll often be approving their leave requests. They will often be having some influence on decisions about remuneration. They will be responsible for the outputs of this person and kind of making sure that their team is pulling in the right direction. People managers in different businesses might have more or fewer responsibilities than the ones I've just described, but basically you've got someone who's responsible for coordinating the activity of people under them as a people manager. And people managers in small businesses typically come from internal promotions, less often from external hires, although it does happen. But at some point along our pathway to leadership and management roles, we've gone from being an individual contributor, right? Someone who's just responsible for us showing up on time and for doing our jobs, to someone who's a supervisor or a team lead or a manager. Your language might vary depending on your context. So typically these people start off and get promoted because they're technically really good at their job, right? They're really excellent beauticians, or they're really good hairdressers, or they're an electrician who does really quality work. They're very reliable, they're great at their job, and you would hope most of the time they're being promoted because they're also a good culture fit, right? They get how things are done around here. There's a level of trust with the management or the ownership, the leadership team, and they kind of get it. They're just a good fit for the business, and we want to support them and give them this chance to develop. The critical assumption here is where things go wrong. And the assumption is that someone who is good at doing the work will also be good at managing the work. Because you've been good at the job before you will now be good at managing a team or leading a team who's responsible for delivering that kind of work. And in small, medium businesses, often this person is the best choice at the time. They have the skill set you need, they've been with the business a while, you're promoting them into a role that is kind of the next step in their career path. And you are making choices based on their success and capability in their previous role. So this might be that your top saleswoman now becomes your sales manager, your best technician might be becoming your supervisor, or your strongest administrator is now your office manager, right? This promotion pathway is very familiar, especially to those of us who work in this space a lot. But what complicates things is the Peter principle. So the Peter principle is this idea that people are promoted to their level of incompetence. You were good at the job before this one, so you were promoted. Maybe you were good at that job, you got promoted again. But at some point there will be a job that you get promoted into where you're not very good at it. Not because you can't be, but because it requires skills or competencies or experiences that you haven't yet mastered or that you haven't yet had exposure to. So people who are promoted from being very good at the doing job into a managing job often fall prey to a skill gap. And these two things are not the same. So where we start off with is in the dark blue, the job that you do, your trade, your skill set, your craft, your technical abilities. So here you're technically very good, you know the job, you're a good culture fit, you're good at managing your own time, you can get your own shit done. All of these are skills that are important for kind of this individual contributor role. But when you get promoted into a management role, suddenly there are a whole bunch of tasks and responsibilities you have that you didn't have when you were an individual contributor. You're now responsible for coaching a team and using your technical expertise to teach new people, to onboard new members of the team, to help upskill your existing team. This coaching skill is not one that you had to do before, but now you're expected to have some capacity to coach kind of in a leadership capacity. You now are managing systems, right? Regular check-ins. You might have quality processes that you're involved in. You might be responsible for, looking at new products or developing new solutions to the problems that your customers are facing. And you're having to hold people accountable through these systems, right? Setting expectations, checking in with people, making sure they have what they need, holding them to task if they're not delivering is something that you have never had to do apart from just for yourself when you've been in this individual role. And also you're now planning and coordinating multiple workloads rather than just having an eye to, your own 30-hour week or 45-hour week and figuring out what you could do. You now have to be across multiple people and understanding what their capability is and how much they can deliver, which is also quite challenging. There might be conflicts you have to manage if you have to mediate between someone in your team and a different team who don't get along. Sometimes it's within your own team. You've got people who just rub each other up the wrong way, figuring out those dynamics. You also are delegating. Because you're a manager, you are going to have less time spent on the tools, whatever your tools look like, because you have all this other shit that you're now responsible for managing. You can't magically create more time for yourself. So you're having to make sure that the work that sits with you is the stuff that only you can do, and you're kind of delegating and giving tasks to other members of your team as well. And obviously you're setting goals, right? You're understanding what the business needs, what your team's responsible for, and then setting goals that are realistic and achievable for your team to achieve, and then kind of manage them in that direction. Excuse me, critically, these two things are not the same, right? So doing is not the same as managing, competence is not the same as coaching, and delivery and coordinating are not the same thing. If you're good at implementing and making shit happen, that doesn't mean you're going to be good at planning to make shit happen. And also, just because you're really good at delivering and performing on your own account, it doesn't mean you're going to be good at holding other people to account, right? It's a very different, they're very different skill sets. Now, my computer is giving me an error message. I'm just going to quickly check that all is well. Oh, I'm good to go. Thank you for your patience. So, given all of this complexity around supporting people who are moving from being an individual contributor to being a manager and thinking about the complexity of the environments that they're managing, especially in the small business world, there are some signs that it's not going well, and your leadership team might need some support. Or if this is you, you might need some support to be upskilling yourself as well. So, the first of these is if you are constantly reverting to what's comfortable and familiar. All of those tasks and responsibilities can feel quite overwhelming. If it's something that you haven't had exposure to before, or if this is your first management role, there's a lot to wrap your head around, and it is very human and very natural for you to be reverting to what's comfortable and familiar, which for most of us is actually the work. So if you as a manager are finding yourself spending a lot of time with customers, a lot of time troubleshooting, maybe picking up stuff that your team really should be doing, that's a bit of a sign that you maybe don't have the bandwidth or the confidence or the skill set to be tackling these kind of people management responsibilities that you're now expected to deliver on. Trying to do everything ourselves is a sign that we're not very good at delegation. If you're working long hours because everything has to be reviewed by you, if you don't feel comfortable kind of getting your team to pick up more complex stuff, you end up doing tasks that really should be sitting with them. Again, that's a sign that there is a skill gap here that might need some attention. If you and your team are always busy and there's a million emails coming in all the time or a million queries from customers, but you're quite low on outputs and deliverables, again, that's a key sign that something isn't going as well as it should here. Busyness is something that for small business is going to be a fact of life because we're often so leanly structured and we don't always have the resource that larger businesses do. But we still should be able to prioritize and get to things that are really important to us, which might be kind of business as usual stuff, but often there is a coordination, communication, development kind of leadership aspect that's missing if all we can ever get to is the busyness of kind of the BAU. So if there is a workload problem here, again, it might just be a volume issue, but typically there is a skill set piece in terms of prioritizing that can be challenging if you're not used to kind of using that muscle. Avoiding tough conversations is something I see a lot of in the HR space because conflict is really uncomfortable. We've done a series recently looking at why we avoid tough conversations and how particularly giving difficult feedback can be challenging. Have a look at those resources on our resources page at myhr.works if you're interested. But if you are not having tough conversations you have to have with your team or you need to have with your team around performance, around behavior, around getting shit done, you can't be a boss and avoid tough conversations. It's a really important and unavoidable skill set that you need. And if you are finding yourself kind of putting things off or knowing that you really should have managed something a bit sooner, again, there's going to be a skill gap issue here. If your team members are unclear about their goals, if they're generally kind of frustrated, if it's not really clear what the priorities are, there's probably kind of a planning strategic piece that's missing here. And if you find yourself trying to be everyone's friend and kind of people pleasing and finding it really hard to say no to leave requests, even though it's going to put a lot bigger burden on the team to have them away over your busy season, again, there's going to be a skill piece that's missing here. All of which can kind of eventuate in what I think of as below the line behavior, right? So blaming, shaming people, being unable to take accountability, not really being able to take on feedback. If you are under supported and kind of feeling overwhelmed by all you have to cope with, that's a very human experience, but it's not okay to respond in ways that kind of involve blame and shame and some of these negative behaviors. So if you are seeing any of this in the way that you show up at work, or if as a business owner or senior leader, you are seeing some of this in your management team, there are some signs here that your team are under supported and that we should be addressing them before things go sideways. Because I promise, go sideways they will. So when we have an under-supported management team or we have under-supported managers, the costs can be really obvious, right? Sometimes we have poor performance behavior kind of being tolerated. You have bad actors who should have been just moved on and told to go somewhere else a long time ago who stick around. Those can have those sort of intangible cultural effects of just pissing everyone off and bringing the mood down. But practically, there are also some really important financial costs to consider. One of which is if your high performers get frustrated, they will become disengaged. No one kind of likes working in an environment where their boss isn't doing a very good job. And if they decide to leave, you're going to have some pretty significant operational costs on your hands. So we know that replacing someone typically costs between 40 to 50% of their annual earnings, whether that's wages or salary. And those costs come from sometimes recruitment fees, like a direct payment to someone who's found that person to place in the role. excuse me. But there's also the cost of writing the job ad, reviewing the CVs, interviewing people, getting them up to speed, like that 3 to 6 month kind of embedding and onboarding time where someone isn't operating at their full capacity. All of those costs can be not an immediate kind of line on your P&L, but in terms of the cost of the business overall, turnover can be really expensive. So making sure that you have your leadership and management team equipped to kind of deliver meaningful results for their teams is really important to minimizing these sometimes less obvious costs. Critically as well, you won't be making progress on big rock strategic items. If your managers are under-supported and under-resourced and they're spending all of their time in this business as usual stuff, it's going to be really tricky for them to find time to rejig the way that your health and safety system works, or to think about new products and new offerings to take to market, or to rework your knowledge base and your SOPs to make them easier to use. None of those big pieces will get gotten to because they're kind of stretch work that your management team are having to kind of push themselves to get to, and they don't have any capacity because they're just kind of stuck in all of the stuff that they don't have the skills to be managing. All of which ultimately means that as the owner, you're going to be getting dragged back into the day-to-day of running your business, where you thought you were hiring people to take care of a bunch of this. Suddenly you'll find yourself troubleshooting, you'll find yourself doing a lot of hand-holding with your team. You might spend a lot of time chasing people up because they go up at MIA and you're not getting a lot of feedback from them, which generally for yourself and for your management team will lead to burnout. People will be taking stress leave, and overall we're all just having a bad time. This is not to fearmonger, like skills gaps don't mean that life is going to be shit necessarily, but when you have a management team who is consistently under supported or ill-equipped, this is kind of where you end up because you don't have the skills to get done what needs to get done. So, having painted a pretty dire picture, let's talk about what good looks like and what we can be doing to improve the way that we show up as managers. And there are 6 core management skills that, broadly speaking, will address kind of 80% of the niggles that come up when it comes to managing people and leading a team. And so as a people manager, what you are responsible for is direction of your team and commercial awareness. You're responsible for setting accountability or setting standards and holding people accountable to those standards. So communicating and coordinating your team with your team and your team, developing the people who report to you, showing up in a way that has, is a impactful kind of leadership presence and with composure, and also for winning the hearts and minds of your team. Now, those are some quite big words on the page there. What we're going to do is spend a bit of time going through each of them and laying out what it means to have good commercial awareness, what it means to have a strong presence and good composure with your team. And then we'll talk about some ways you can reflect on whether this is a skill that you have or your leaders have, and what we can be doing in terms of next steps. That's the next section of this presentation. I'm just going to really quickly check myself time. Yeah, great, I'm doing well for time. Cool, let's jump back in. So we'll start off with direction commercial awareness. So this is the ability to connect your team's work, so their day-to-day, with what drives the business forward, what the business cares about, the goals you're trying to achieve, and kind of the overall strategic direction. So this can sound dry and boring, or it can sound kind of exciting, pie in the sky, and a bit fluffy. But the truth is it's somewhere in the middle, because connecting work and purpose is a really key skill of a people manager. From a practical point of view, because it means people understand why they're doing what they're doing and why it matters to the business. But also because on a human level, we want to know that our work has impact. And if it's clear to us why we're doing what we're doing and how it contributes to the bigger picture, we're going to feel a lot more connected to the mission of the business and connected to our work, which is one of those factors that drives intrinsic motivation, which I'll talk about a bit more in a second. So practically in the small business world, this means that you understand where the business is heading. You can translate the business strategy or business goals into team priorities, and you can make sure that their work aligns with commercial outcomes. Practically, sometimes this means that you are making decisions on the ground that are informed by what you know the kind of strategic goals of the business are. In one example, if you were having to choose between 2 different software providers, and you knew that one of the goals of the business this year was cost cutting, because frankly it's been a really difficult year, particularly in New Zealand in the last couple of years, you might make a choice to go with the provider who's significantly cheaper but doesn't have all the features that you want. not because you don't want the features, but because there are just some budget constraints that you have to operate in. That's one very granular example of how understanding the strategic and commercial priorities means you can make commercially informed, sensible decisions on the ground without having to kind of escalate things all the time. And critically focusing on the right things means your team will move the needle on what it is that they're expected to deliver. It can be really hard to get good shit done when you don't know what it is that you're trying to achieve as a business and therefore what you're trying to achieve as a team. So having a good sense of where the business is going and how that translates into your world is critical, because it's all of the decisions you make day to day about the things that you want to prioritize, and making sure that the work that you do is of quality and serves sort of broader needs of the business. So some questions or some statements to reflect on and ask whether they're true of you in your world is, do you know what the strategic goals of your business are for the next 12 months? Maybe you have a quarterly cycle, maybe you have a yearly cycle, maybe you have a 5-yearly cycle. You obviously don't have to have it kind of taped to the roof above your bed and it'll be the first thing you look at every morning, but you need to know what the direction and strategy of the business is so you can translate that into what that means for your team. And then equally, could any of your team tell you what the priorities are for the next month, quarter, year, if you ask them? Do they have a good understanding of why they're doing what they're doing and what their priorities are? And if you can say that each of those statements are true and reflect what's happening in your world, that's fantastic. You are doing a wonderful job connecting what the work is that your team is doing with the big picture and what the business needs. But if you don't think these statements are true, or if you think they're less true, it might be a sign that you need to spend some time thinking about how you yourself build your understanding of the business's commercial context and of the business's finances, not the strategy, and maybe then how you translate that into kind of level appropriate informational context for your team to be aware of. And then being able to explain how your team's work contributes to overall business performance. Obviously, if you are unclear why your team are doing what they're doing, it's going to be very hard to be an effective people manager. Accountability and standards are next. So this is all about setting clear expectations and consistently holding the line. And it's one of the things that, in my experience, people managers find the most frustrating, because being held accountable can feel very uncomfortable. It can feel really uncomfortable to be expected to do what we said we would do. It can be very uncomfortable to be trying to deliver commercial outcomes like sales numbers or quotas in a really challenging sales environment. So accountability, sometimes when you're on the receiving end of it, can feel uncomfortable, which people can perceive as feeling unsafe or difficult or upsetting, but that's not what it's meant to be. What we're meant to be doing is defining goals and behavioural expectations and quality standards. What do you, Sylvie, need to deliver this quarter or deliver this year? Here's what I expect of you in terms of behaviour, and here's sort of the quality of the work I'm looking at. Obviously, a bunch of this is kind of set as you go along. You don't have to necessarily give your baristas a perfect example of a flat white to hold, right? That would be impractical. But in terms of setting standards, do you have some kind of feedback loop for understanding if your team are meeting those standards and if they aren't? Because holding the line here means reinforcing these standards and expectations regularly and addressing gaps early and constructively. When you have people who are new to your business or who are early in their career or who maybe have changed industry, it's very understandable for there to be a bit of a learning curve in terms of understanding what's expected of them. That learning curve does not mean they are not a good employee who wants to be there, who is motivated and has the right skill set. It's just a bit of a process as you adjust to what a good board report looks like in this business versus your previous business, or what behaviour is expected around going to outside of work staff functions here versus at your previous place of employment. All of that is just a part of the learning curve of being new to a business or new to a role. But if you aren't holding the line, those standards will remain the same and slip. And especially for people who have been in your business for a longer period of time, the challenges there tend to be around complacency. Perhaps they have had a really, really strong relationship with the small business owner or the manager before you, and they're used to coasting at a level that they're comfortable with. Maybe that level is acceptable. Sometimes it isn't, and having to reinforce to them or reset those expectations can be quite a challenging conversation. So being able to be clear on what's expected, why it's expected, what quality is required, and how you're going to support people to get there is a really critical skill. And it's not about being harsh. It's about being consistent and fair and predictable so that there are no surprises when it comes time to performance reviews or when it comes time to remuneration conversations. But if you're not the one setting standards, people will set their own standards, and those standards might be acceptable to the business or they might not be. Your job is to make sure that they are acceptable and to be the one who is consistently checking and making sure that people are meeting what's required of them and delivering what they said they would deliver. So is it true of your team that each person's goals or deliverables are clearly defined and repeatedly communicated and well understood? We often need to hear something sort of 6 to 10 times before it really sinks in. Which explains some of the challenges I'm having with my 9-month-old at the moment, but that's a different story. If you have sent an email to someone once 3 months ago outlining your expectations for a project, and then you catch up with them 3 months later and you're grumpy that they haven't sort of met the standards expected of them, that's kind of a you problem, because one email 3 months ago may as well never have happened. They might have seen it at the time and gone, yeah, I kind of get it. But in terms of bringing the expectations for that client deliverable to life, or making sure that they understand how important it is that they're filling out their documentation and paperwork consistently, you need to be the one repeatedly communicating and setting those standards to make sure that they're well understood. A one-off may as well not have happened in this kind of space. And is it true that you give regular feedback, not just during formal performance reviews? This is positive as well as negative. I think keeping compliments private is a crime. So whenever there's something nice to say about your team, share it with them. They might not want it shared in a team forum. Some people, that can make them feel uncomfortable. But make sure one-on-one you let them know what the cool thing was that they did, or what the feedback was that you got from a client that you wanted to pass on. Make sure you're sharing the positive feedback to reinforce kind of good behavior, as much as you're sharing the constructive feedback that is about what needs to be improved or what gaps need to be closed. And the third skill here, communication coordination. This is something that people tend to have kind of an instinctive level of comfort with, which might be more than is required for the role. You think about the manager who gives you 1,000 pieces of information to get the job done when you kind of just needed them to bullet point a few answers for you. Or you think about the manager who sends you an email asking you to do something but doesn't tell you when it's due, how they want it delivered, what the client expectations are, what the brief was, any kind of context you need to be aware of. We all fall on a spectrum, and some points of that spectrum are more useful or less useful than others. But this is really all about making sure the work runs smoothly and that everyone's working on stuff that matters. So it's really important that there is clarity and alignment and pretty straightforward delivery across your team, because then you'll get the right things done without the kind of handbrakes of duplication and delays. And the communication piece is quite important because it means you can align priorities, pick up any confusion or misalignment, and make sure information is going to the right people at the right time. It's really difficult to do your job if there's information that you don't have. And as a people manager, often you will have access to budget decisions or leadership conversations or customer feedback, all of which informs a picture for you that informs or creates a picture for you that informs how you might want to do something or choices you might make about the work in front of you. Your team needs to have that information. It's unreasonable to expect people to be delivering perfectly if they're flying blind. So that communication piece is really important. And this is where your technical knowledge, like the fact that you were an excellent hairdresser, or you were an excellent accounts receivable officer, or you were an excellent HR advisor, will come in handy, because you are really familiar with the process probably of getting your job done, whatever your job is. You'll understand where bottlenecks are. You can probably help kind of spot ineffective processes. You probably have a good sense of where problems are going to come from. So this will mean that as a coordinator of work, you have a pretty good sense of how the work gets done, and being able to kind of point people in the right direction is going to come a bit easier to you because you do have that useful background. So is it true that you have regular catch-ups with your team, both one-on-one and as a team, to go over your workloads and priorities, often kind of work in progress meetings or WIPs, or kind of your weekly toolbox or your monthly kind of project review? Any of this kind of stuff's really useful, again, because you're aligning and coordinating with your team about what's getting done, who's doing it, and how things are tracking. And is it true that your team would say that you give them the context, information, and tools needed to do their jobs? Do they feel kept in the dark a bit? Do they often come stumbling up against something they didn't know? Or do you often kind of catch them up on client feedback? Are you sharing information with them Are you making sure that they have what they need to get things done? Is really important. It's so hard to get to do a good job when you don't know what's expected of you, or when you don't know what the priorities are, and it's your job as a people manager to be making sure your team has that. The fourth is team development. We're moving here away from the kind of work coordination, kind of technical skills, into more of the leadership and personal skills needed to be successful as a people manager. And team development is about growing capability. It's not just about getting the work done. So when developing your team is ignored, engagement drops and your high performers will leave. Development means anything that is improving people's skill set or competence or capability. So it could be learning on the job. It might be giving them, delegating them tasks that are a bit outside their comfort zone. It could be shadowing a senior person. It could be coming along to kind of big decision-making meetings so they can see how that process is managed. It can be promotion into bigger job titles, but most of the time, most development is happening kind of within a person's current job. And it can be formal training, like coming to these webinars or coming to webinars similar to these, or going off-site or getting a coach or a mentor. So any of that kind of activity that is helping someone develop their skills or their capability or their competencies is development work. So don't just think expensive 5-day training courses. It's everything that happens in the workplace that helps them build their skill as well. So your role is to create these opportunities for learning, whether they're formal or informal. Make sure you're stretching people to a level where they are building their competency without freaking out and having to do something really hard or that they find really difficult, and making sure you're taking an active interest in their development and career aspirations. So not everyone wants to be promoted. Plenty of people want to show up, do the job well, and then go home because that suits their life. They might have other commitments, whether it's family or church or sport or community obligations, that mean that they aren't choosing to kind of pursue super accelerated career development right now. Super fine, but isn't at all a problem. But where people do want to be developing and improving their skills, you need to be aware of that. So if they come to you and say, hey, I would love the chance to develop my technical seniority, or I want to become a people manager one day, you can be helping them plot a pathway to that development, rather than having them be grumpy about it and choosing to resign and go elsewhere when you haven't even had a chance to try and plug the gap for them. So I mentioned formal and informal learning. It is really ineffective to send people on training courses and for that to be the only development that they get done. None of us learn how to walk or how to talk or how to have friends or how to skate by watching videos or watching webinars. We need to be doing things to build the skill. So an effective learning model is 70% of your development comes from on the task, doing the thing that you are trying to get better at, whether that's public speaking, whether it's managing conflict, whether it's getting better at understanding a P&L. You need to spend more time doing the thing you want to get better at, which I think is pretty intuitive. 20% should come from kind of social learning. So that might be having a mentor, having a coach. It might be shadowing a senior person. It might be getting peer feedback. So 20% comes from learning from other people, and 10% should come from your formal learning opportunities. So your courses, your books, your TED Talks, your webinars, anything that is intended to teach someone something should form part of that 10% of their development and the time that they spend developing things. So is it true that in your team, you encourage people to solve their own problems instead of becoming the fixer? Or do you try and rescue people when they're facing a tricky problem? And do you know each of your team's career aspirations for the next 1 to 2 years? If the answers are yes, great, those are some good skills that you've got. If not, you might need to spend some time thinking about how you build out your development abilities here. Second to last is presence and composure. So as people managers, if we panic, everyone panics. It is really difficult to stay calm when your senior person, who is probably more capable and more experienced than you, if they're losing their head, the whole team is gone. We can't expect our teams to stay calm and composed in the face of pressure or stress when we can't do the same. So this is a lot about having good self-management and emotional regulation skills. If you find yourself shouting at work, if you find yourself bursting into tears a lot, if you find yourself eating your feelings or any of these kind of unhelpful, unconstructive coping mechanisms, there's nothing wrong with feeling like you want to shout, or there's nothing wrong with feeling like you want to burst into tears. Those feelings are very human and I'm sure a very appropriate reaction to what you're managing. What's important is how you respond to those feelings, because letting them out at work by biting the head off your colleague, or sending a really furious email, or just sobbing in meetings all the time is going to be really deeply unsettling for your team, and it's going to be difficult for your reputation as a people manager, because you will not be seen to be kind of a calm, steady hand. So what's important is remembering that if your team are worried about you and worried about how you're going to respond and worried about the stress and the drama that you bring to their life, you are taking away a huge chunk of their energy and their kind of emotional labor from doing the work and dealing with customers and getting shit done and kind of managing whatever they've got going on in their personal lives, because we've always got something going on. It's really important that you are not adding to their stress, and you can do that by managing your own feelings and your own emotions and showing up in a way that's calm and responding thoughtfully, and not adding fuel to the fire, basically, of whatever the stressful situations you're dealing with. Critically, we know that no one comes up with good ideas when they're being chased by a tiger. If you are breathing fire at someone, if you are being rude or uncivil, if you are shouting at them in front of other people, any of that kind of behavior is going to massively undercut their motivation. It's going to massively drop their ability to be like a logical thinker, because so much of their mental energy is going on dealing with the emotional stress that they're dealing with. So not only are you not going to drive better results by shouting at your team, you are going to be undermining their ability to do their jobs, because they're having to deal with so much stress and so much angst that's coming from you. So is it true that your team would say that you're usually calm and professional when under pressure? If it is, awesome, you're doing a great job. And can you say that the last time you felt yourself getting frustrated or angry, you took steps to calm down before dealing with the issue? This might be going to a boxing class, might be just having a good night's sleep, it could be going and spending time with friends or family, it could be having a vent to a trusted colleague or a trusted friend. Any of these kind of more healthy coping mechanisms mean that you're going to be dealing with your own emotions, so you can then show up and deal with whatever the situation is in a calm, kind of proactive way. But if you come to it when you're still in your kind of red emotional head and frustrated and grumpy and just absolutely losing it, you are not going to be able to logically and calmly find your way through. And that's usually what problem solving requires. It's unusual for us to be able to find good problems when we're very heightened or frustrated or really set off, because we don't come up with good ideas when we're being chased by tigers. And the last one here, I really struggled with what to call this skill. Winning hearts and minds was kind of the best I could come up with, but really it's the secret sauce of people management. It's the pastoral care. It's showing up as a caring, kind of empathetic leader, because when people feel a sense of belonging, they will feel much more motivated to get shit done and to put their best into their jobs than if they don't. We know that feeling like you belong somewhere, like you're really connected to the purpose and the people and you're cared about, is one of the 3 critical drivers of motivation, along with feeling like you've got some autonomy and feeling like you're good at what you're doing. So the sense of belonging, you are a critical part in fostering it, because you are the person that they might have the most contact with at work. There was some really interesting research, I can't remember if it came out of New Zealand or out of Australia, that showed that your boss has a more direct impact on your health and well-being, like your blood pressure, your cholesterol levels, your ability to sleep well, your kind of cortisol levels, than your primary healthcare provider does. So when your boss can make a bigger impact on your health than your doctor can, we know that we have a duty of care here, not to make people unwell, but also it's an amazing opportunity to make people really well, to show up and really show that we care about them and we trust them, so that we are building a sense of belonging and building a sense of community at work. We also know that people who have teams where there is a strong sense of psychological safety, that's the number 1 predictor of team success and effectiveness. It's not the qualifications on the team, it's not years of experience, it's not their IQ levels. High-performing teams feel really safe with each other, which means that they feel like they can make mistakes and they won't be blamed or shamed for them. They feel like they can raise concerns or criticisms or kind of point things out, and they're not going to get shut down for it. They feel like they can ask questions and do some learning and be supported in that way. So all of those experiences build up to a sense of psychological safety, which means your team is going to be just inherently more high performing than if they didn't feel safe at work. Which I think is reasonably intuitive. Again, when you feel safe, you're going to take risks, you're going to be more creative, you're going to be more connected to what it is that you're doing. Whereas if you feel unsafe, so much of that energy is going to be about kind of protecting yourself and trying not to piss that person off, and not putting your head up, and not raising your hand in meetings. So much of that energy is kind of dedicated to keeping yourself safe when it could be spent on so many other things that matter more at work. Importantly, especially if you're a younger manager or a newer manager, caring for your team doesn't mean that you're their parent or their best friend or their therapist. It's not about crossing boundaries and showing up for them at 11 o'clock on a Friday when they're drunk and crying outside of a bar. And it's not about getting deeply involved with their family life or trying to help them mediate a difficult relationship at their church. It's about taking care of them within your mandate as their manager. So it's things like making sure their workload is manageable. It's things like giving them some grace when they're having a tough time, whether that's because they're a new parent dealing with sleep deprivation, or they have just had a bereavement, or they are managing a health condition. As much as you can, where you can support people and help them navigate those situations, you are going to be showing that you are a safe person, that you are on their side, and that you trust them to get the job done, even if they might need to come in late for a few days because they're just dealing with a particularly tricky sleep progression. Completely hypothetically, not all drawn from my own life at the moment. So is it true that each of your team would say that you care about them beyond their kind of day-to-day tasks and workload? And does your team feel safe raising concerns, challenging ideas, telling you when they think you're wrong, and kind of challenging you on things? And if that's true, you are clearly making some great progress in winning people's hearts and minds and creating that sense of belonging. This is often a skill that people, again, we sort of naturally fall on a spectrum on. Some of us build trust through care. Some of us build trust through being a really reliable, predictable kind of work-related person. The way that you find your way through this will be really unique to you and your circumstances. But I would just reiterate that people who feel like they belong at work and like someone cares about them are going to be more high-performing than people that aren't. And again, it's not about crossing boundaries or being people's parents and being their agony aunts. It's just about taking care of them and being safe for them within the context of your relationship at work. That's really what we're looking for. So what next? We've painted this utopian picture of what these fabulous 6 core skills are. How do you start improving on them if you're a people manager, or if you're a business owner? How do you support your team to improve on them? So for people managers, I really cannot reiterate enough that none of us are born knowing how to manage people, and management is a skill that can be learned. It's sometimes hard to teach because it's a bunch of different kind of disparate skills, but it's certainly something that you can work on and that you can improve. So the first thing to do is to identify your gap or your gaps. Where are you weakest on these 6 core skills? And what improvement would make the biggest impact to your team? One of the resources I'll be sharing after this webinar is a self-reflection tool, where it's some of the questions that you've seen me including at the bottom, or some of the statements, sorry, at the bottom of each of these slides. So you can go through, kind of rate yourself, add up your scores, and see where you live, or see where you're landing right now, and make a plan for next steps. But if you know where you're not super strong, I suspect if you've been paying attention as we go through, you will have a bit of an inkling about where you might need to just spend some time developing things. So know what your gap is and figure out what improvement would make the biggest difference to your team, and then start building a plan from there. And honestly, it's just one place to start. We can only, when we run or when we walk, we can only run or walk one step at a time. You do not have to become an amazing manager overnight. It can feel really paralyzing sometimes and overwhelming, expecting ourselves to become these amazing super cool humans, within a few weeks or a few months. This stuff can take some time. It is totally fine to just pick one place or one skill to start, work on developing that, and then kind of move on to the next one. So choose one thing, do one thing differently, but make sure it's consistent, and hold yourself accountable. If you need a buddy to do this with, if you are working in with your manager or your leader to do this, if you want to take notes at the end of every day, writing down what it was that you did differently and how you use the skill today. Perhaps you want to give yourself a treat at the end of each week if you didn't shout at your team this week, and normally you shout at them once a week. Whatever the mechanisms or systems you have in place to hold yourself accountable, start using them on the skill set piece. Figure out how you might want to keep yourself incentivized and keep it front of mind, and then kind of check in every couple of weeks and see how you're going. Crucially, ask for support. You do not have to become anything, let alone a superstar manager, without the support of other people who have their own kind of duty of care for you. So talk to your leader or your business owner about the skill that you're developing. Work it in with your performance review or your development plan if you have one. If there's coaching or training available, that's cool. It might just be an accountability check-in every time you have your monthly work with your leader to talk about how you've been developing this skill. And sometimes peer support is a really good place to start. If you are close with a colleague on your level, if you've got mates who are in similar positions or maybe similar roles in other businesses, see if one of them can work with you to hold you accountable for the skill and to kind of help you as you go along. Often it can feel a bit vulnerable saying, hey, I think I'm shit at coordination and communication and want to get better at it. Can you kind of walk with me as I figure out how to get better at this skill? But it can be lonely trying to get better at things, and management is a lonely function anyway. So bring in your leader or a peer or someone in the business or outside the business who you trust to walk along with you and see what difference that makes. And ask for feedback. So you can do this with your team immediately. What do you guys think I'm not so great at? What would make your lives better? But also, once you've been doing this work for a while, ask if they're noticing any differences. You can say, hey, I've been working on doing a better job kind of communicating what our priorities are week to week. Have you seen an improvement? Kind of, do you think I'm getting better here? And then rinse and repeat. If you are moving the needle, awesome. Pick your next gap and kind of move on. But the key takeaways here are know what it is you want to improve on. Just do one thing consistently for a few weeks and see if that makes a difference, and ask for support, whether that's your boss or a colleague or someone else who's appropriate. You don't have to do this alone, and having someone to keep you company as you try and work on something can often make it feel less like a bit of a lost cause or less like a long slog up a mountain, let's say. For business owners, your job is to coach and support, not to rescue your people managers. It can be really difficult to restrain ourselves from getting in amongst things and solving their problems or rescuing them, but that is not teaching them how to use the skills or how to build the skills they need, and ultimately you're going to be stuck in this place for much longer than you would like to be. So the first thing for you to do as the business owner is to set expectations. Do your leaders know what good management looks like? Are they worried about approving people's sick leave requests at short notice because at some point in the past you chewed them out about it? Have you put roadblocks in their way that are stopping them from being effective managers? Do they need more clarity from you around the strategic goals of the business? Figure out what it is that you can do to paint a clearer picture and make it more obvious what matters and what doesn't matter, so that your people managers can then kind of flow that into their teams in the way that they like to do things. And potentially you might need to improve your support cadences. Do you have monthly check-ins with your team? Or have you assumed that because they're senior, sensible people, they don't need that support from you and they just need to go off and do their own thing? Is there a version of a world where, if you don't already, you can have kind of a leadership roundtable? So get all your management team together where they can chew ideas out and bounce ideas off each other and have conversations. That could be one way to build in support that doesn't rely on your time and your coaching skills and you solving every problem. So figure out what your support cadences could be and figure out how you can close that gap. And especially if you have a tendency to get involved and to rescue people, practice just acting as a sounding board. You're really just holding up a mirror to someone and saying, it sounds like you're dealing with a really frustrating situation with Sylvie, where she's consistently taking a long time to deliver work that's of excellent quality, but she's just kind of not getting through enough of it. That sounds really frustrating. What do you think might be driving that behavior? Why do you think she spends so long on each of her reports or each of her webinars? So what are some of the things that you might be able to do to help? So what's your plan for dealing with it? Okay, cool. What support do you need from me to get this going? Great, sounds like you've got a plan. You're asking questions and kind of helping them work through the problem themselves. You're not saying, Sylvie's always taking it on her webinars. Look, here's what you need to do. What you need to do is go and have a chat with her and tell her it's taking too long and give her 2 hours and she has to time herself. Like, you don't want to be giving solutions to them. You can offer suggestions, but really you are acting as a coach. So you're holding up a mirror and just bouncing questions back to them so that they can find their way through the problem. So ask more questions than you do at the moment. Maybe try one extra question per conversation as a place to start, and really make sure you're listening to what the problem is and then making suggestions rather than giving them a solution or telling them what you want them to do. They need to be able to figure it out for themselves. Otherwise, you will always be on the receiving end of these phone calls where they just don't know what to do and they're expecting you to fix everything. And then we need to have this feedback loop, right? So make sure you're measuring your results. In performance reviews, if you do them, are you seeing an uplift in what people are achieving because they now have a more capable, more present management team who's supporting them? If you run team engagement scores, are you seeing an increase in how engaged people are at work? Are your commercial outcomes moving? Are you getting through more stuff and selling more widgets because your team know what their priorities are now and they can kind of streamline things and get more shit done? Sometimes it's honestly just a vibe check. And I don't know how to quantify this, but when you walk into a business where people are having a good time, you can feel it. And you would never be able to put your finger on it, but there's an energy in the room when people are stressed or worried or confused and frustrated that isn't there when people are having a good time. So sometimes it might just be feeling like things are going better. And if that's the case, look, that's totally a win. Even if you can't point to a 10% increase in engagement scores, having a much better vibe check is certainly something to be proud of. So we are coming to the end of the section where I talk a whole lot. If you have any questions or anything you'd like me to speak on, now's a good time to pop it into the Q&A box because I'll leave some time for that at the end. So while you're popping in your questions, I will just go through these bonus resources quickly and then we can jump into Q&A. In your follow-up email, you will get a recording of the webinar. That'll probably be tomorrow or the day after. You will get a copy of the slides for you to refer to. You will get a copy of the self-assessment tool for people managers for you to go through in your own time and figure out where your gaps might be. And there'll also be a link to a complimentary 30-minute consultation with me in case this has prompted any thoughts or questions. I'm an HR person. I'm not a salesperson. So what we will do is just have a chat about whatever might be on your mind. If it sounds like there might be an opportunity for MyHR to jump in and be useful, I might suggest you have a chat with one of our sales team, but it's not a hard sell environment. I am truly just here to see if there's anything that I can help with and see if it might make your lives easier. So that is all from me. Thank you for bearing with me as we go through. I'm going to jump out of this and just see how we're going for time. Oh, we are at 1 o'clock. Lovely. Let me see if there are any questions that have come through. And if not, we can, if not, then we can wrap up for the day and send you back all into your afternoons. But yeah, I'll give it a second in case there are any questions that come through. Oh, no Q&As. I can see that we are having attendance drop off as well. So we have taken the end of our time slot today. If you do have any questions, you're very welcome to get in touch. I'm Sylvie at myhr.works and we're on LinkedIn and Instagram and all the social media pages. But thank you for attending today. I hope that's been a useful session. I look forward to seeing you at the next one. And yeah, have a wonderful afternoon and I'll see you next time.